We're now live. Welcome to Critical Witness, where we talk about theology, apologetics, and anything else that comes up. This is conversation number 6 with Andy Kind, comedian, promedian, preacher, generally nice guy. And I've just got an echo. Hold on. There we go. So I'm going to just jump right in. Andy, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you became a Christian, and what led you into comedy.
Great. So some nice, easy questions there to start off with. So, yeah. Hello, my name is Andy Kind, and I haven't spoken to a person in the flesh since the 30th of March. Nor have I worn any trousers.
Good start. Neither is the guy next to you, but hey.
It feels like a hostage video.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, the Duke of Wellington here, he's lucky because he's only a top half bust. I actually am a full person, but all of my trousers are just hanging out on the right. Going like, where is he? Where do you think he's gone? Like, do you think he's dead? He must be dead. At this point, he's dead, isn't he? I am. What was the first question? What's my story?
Yeah, where are you from, and how did you become a Christian? The general
okay,
two,
great.
Questions.
So I am from Newcastle under Lyme, which is the better of the two Newcastles in the country, and I started comedy on the 23rd of January 2005. So that's a long time ago now, and that's been my only job since, really. I now work for a church as well, but I've never had a proper job, which explains, when someone meets me in person, I mean, that comes across quite clearly that this guy has never had to submit to any kind of authority because he's just totally all over the place. So, and then how did I become a Christian? Well, my mum and dad are both Christians, but I suppose I was raised in a bit of a Christian bubble, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I simply mean that the only real positive Christian influence I had was from my parents. My mum decided that she wanted to serve as a lay reader in an Anglican church when I was quite young, and that was in a very sleepy parochial part of the country. And so there wasn't a youth group. I didn't have a Christian friend really until I was 24. So apart from the influence of my parents, I was kind of flying blind a little bit, and it was all jam and Jerusalem, and very nice, genuinely Christian people, but there wasn't anything in terms of discipleship. I hadn't heard the word apologetics until I was into my 20s. So I'm quite a late developer, really. I made a commitment to Jesus. I remember doing it at 6 years old and definitely meaning it, but also I was 6. But I committed my life, or recommitted my life. I started to follow Jesus at the age of 22, just after university, when I'd had I hadn't really enjoyed university, but I'd basically gone off the rails and been a bit of a loose cannon, lost a lot of friends. And I remember sitting at the back of this sleepy Anglican church in Newcastle under Lyme at the age of 22 and just saying to God, okay, I don't know what happens next, but I know that I need you. And so that was it. There was no, I've had amazing spiritual experiences since then. But in terms of my conversion, it's not an amazing story. It was just a choice to follow based on past mistakes.
Interesting. Out of curiosity, what did you study? I missed that bit.
Modern languages, French with Italian.
Nice.
You're so sophisticated.
Yeah.
I am a sophist. I'm the Christopher Hitchens of my flat.
It's a small puddle that you're part of, other than a big pond. So where to go with that? So you went from languages to not having real jobs.
Yeah.
And now,
but being really good at talking about why I didn't have real jobs.
That's it.
In several tongues.
And then went into comedy. Whereabouts in that process?
So started comedy 2005. So I had a year sort of doing some just mediocre graduate jobs that we all go into because we think that's what we need to do. And then, 2000. So I was 20, 24, 25 when I started in comedy, and had not really done anything since uni, apart from become a Christian. And
it's very significant.
Really felt I was thinking, I've got a friend at the moment who has only recently become a Christian, and she's hearing unbelievable stuff, really prophetic stuff from the Lord. Like, her hearing is so sharp. She sent me a passage today, and which just absolutely nailed something I needed to get wisdom on. And I do think that because in those early days when you become a Christian, you tend to have a lot of really amazing experiences. Maybe because you're all of a sudden aware of stuff that had been hidden in plain sight, and now you're able to join the dots with the spiritual realm. But also because I think shortly after you become a Christian, and now that I work as an evangelist and work leading a church as well, I'm very aware of this in terms of trying to disciple people. There is a very quick backlash, and however you want to describe that, whether you want to describe it as enemy attack or the world, the flesh, the devil, whatever you want to describe it as, you have that initial honeymoon period before there's a crash of some sort. And I can't remember what the point I was making was, because I was distracted by my own face on the screen. And
you can hide your self-view.
No, but I don't want to. I'm a redeemed narcissist, but I still carry all the cards.
I'm glad you're being vulnerable, because I think that's something that we all struggle with when it comes to Zoom. Is you don't look at everyone else's faces, you look at your own, and it's not just me.
I'm looking at your faces as well. You both got very nice faces.
Well, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Andy.
Very nice. So help me get back onto the narrow path.
Well, you're talking about comedy, so I was just kind of thinking that, because I listen to a lot of comedians, and it strikes me as you have to be a bit weird to become a comedian, because you have to, like, it strikes me as like doing stand-up or something like that, because you have this part of you as a human being that wants to be loved by people. But there's something that strikes me about when someone looks into going into comedy, that you have that, but you also have to acknowledge that people are just going to be like, you're going to be really, really rubbish at something.
Yeah.
And you're going to it's going to be awkward. People aren't going to be laughing at you, and it's going to suck until you get good at it. Because you don't, no, from what I've listened to, no one starts off as a great comic, even though, the great comics we look at now, they didn't start off great. They would say they sucked for years. And, went through all these sort of, experiences. But, so, I mean, what made you kind of be able to kind of transcend that, like deal with the wanting to be liked by people, which I think is, I don't know, the kind of psychology of that, but also dealing with the, getting through those hard times before you kind of became better.
Well, that's amazing. Actually, I remember what I was going to say about the sort of the dark ages between leaving university and starting comedy. Simply that I really felt the Lord speaking to me very dramatically about going into comedy. So I definitely was called into comedy, definitely, and it was confirmed in different places. And I'll give an example. On my second ever gig, I wasn't supposed to be doing a gig. I'd done this gig down in Bath, and it had gone very well. And, lots of people try comedy, but most only try it once. So I think if I'd done a bad gig, first of all, I wouldn't have gone back on stage, because it is terrifying. And there is a lot of shame that you can feel as a new comic. The idea of doing badly, it's your worst fear. You dream about it. You have anxiety dreams on the run up to it. And then if it actually happens, well, okay, the anticipation is worse than the reality, but it's still horrendous. So I was really blessed that I had an amazing gig. And then a week later, I went to another gig with a friend of mine in Stoke just to watch. And I went up to the promoter, the guy running the show at the break, and said, I do comedy and I live locally. Can I have a go at some point in the future? As childlike as that. And this guy said, well, the middle act, the guy who's supposed to be on next, is just called to say he's stuck in traffic on the M6. He's not going to make it. Do you want to go on now? And I did go on, and I had the best gig of anyone on the night. and I got loads of gigs off the back of it. And what's even more dramatic than that is that in the kind of in the 2,000 gigs I've done since then, I have never once experienced somebody not turning up when they were supposed to be there. So I remember ringing my mum saying, "Mum, this is what Jesus wants me to do." And the line went dead. I heard a bit of crying and the line went dead, but that was fine. Remind me again, Dan, what your follow-up question was, because it's like the two Ronnie sketch of Mastermind, isn't it? This I'm basically asking the question before I'm answering the previous question.
So it's basically about the sort of the psychology of getting into comedy.
Got it. Yeah. So you're absolutely right, and you can sort of sum it up in this: in order to do comedy, you can't worry too much about what people think about you. But the only reason people do comedy in the first place is because they want to be liked. So there is just that paradox and that tension. I think I was just desperate. And I think I was just desperate. Have you seen Band of Brothers? So in Band of Brothers, there's an episode where I think it's Lieutenant Spears runs through the German lines to give a message to one of the other companies and comes back and they say, "Are you not scared?" And he said, we're all scared. The difference between me and you is you still think there's hope. You have to get to a point where you're so desperate. And the same applies, and particularly applies for evangelism and mission. Like, you have to understand you're already dead. And when I say that in terms of evangelism, I simply mean you should have died to yourself already. So the reason people don't share the gospel is not really because, I don't have the techniques. It's that they're worried, they're scared.
Yeah. They
are scared about rejection in the same way that new comedians are scared about rejection. But you have to understand, you still think there's hope. You're already dead. And once you accept that, once the seed falls to the ground and dies, then actually that's when you bear fruit. So as a comedian, I was just desperate enough that even if it didn't go really smoothly, I just thought, you know what, there's nothing else that I want to do. I definitely feel called to this, and I don't really think there's anything else that I'm capable of doing. I'm very easily distracted, and I'd done a couple of graduate jobs and just didn't feel alive in any way. But those main two things, because the Bible says, doesn't it, that God will give us the desires of our hearts. And that doesn't mean whatever your flesh is crying out for, God will deliver it like the genie. Never had a friend like Jesus. But it does mean, I think, and this was massive revelation for me when I first became a Christian, to understand that the gifts and dreams that were, the good dreams, the healthy dreams that were planted in me weren't accidental, that I'm not simply a protoplasmic sack of chemicals with a limited shelf life. I am that, but I'm also made in the image of God. I am, dearly bought with a price and stuff. And so to have that realization that God had a plan for me, and his plan, as bizarre as it seemed to me and the people around me, was comedy and performance and the arts. That was just incredible. That level of intimacy, that God knows me, loves me, and has good things for me. Because I knew Christians, but they were teachers or social workers or nurses. None of them were comedians. Christians didn't do that. So, yeah. But in terms of the psychology, it is just, now I would say, it's easier now because, first of all, I'm good at what I do. And even if a gig is not easy, I still have all the buttons that I can press. Statistically, I know that 97% of the time it's going to go really well. So you lose that fear. But also, I think as I'm 16 years into my Christian journey, I am much better at taking captive every thought and submitting it to Christ. And and understanding that my identity is not in what people think about me. If you live for other people's affirmation, you'll die by their condemnation. And I've died a death of 1,000 cuts, but or 1,000 heckles. Not that you really get many heckles, but
just to pick up on something you said a little while ago. So you mentioned about your friend. Well, when you first become a Christian, you tend to have these more sort of vivid, almost spiritual experiences. And I that resonated with me, because I think I had very similar experiences. That I became a Christian out of a completely secular background, kind of unorthodox, and I remember having like very, very vivid spiritual experiences that I'd be honest, I haven't had anything like that since. But they're kind of fused in my my kind of memory. And what you're talking about, the kind of backlash that comes as well. I mean, did you experience some kind of the sort of backlash kind of thing after you became a Christian? What were the sort of struggles that's kind of associated with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that because I became a Christian in a bit of a bubble, I was also probably quite protected, because I wasn't really allowed. I think one of the things that didn't happen is that I didn't lay down some of the old ways of behavior. So although I was never like a big boozer, I would still go out and get drunk. I would still probably, I remember doing, I had a friend called Duncan who came to see me do comedy. And I early on, because you only, in any walk of life, in any career, you model the people ahead of you, don't you? You kind of, if you're in the army, you do what the NCOs do. And in comedy, you have the precedent set for you, and you work to that. So, Jesus said, I only do what I see my Father doing. And it's the same for all of us, but that doesn't necessarily mean spiritual fathers or biological fathers. The people above us, the people in authority above us, we model them often when we don't really want to. So I was just following the crowd, if you like, and using quite a lot of sexual material. Even if I wasn't really engaging in that sort of thing in real life, I was still talking about it. And my mate Duncan said, you know what? When you say that you're a Christian on stage, everything else you say after that will reflect on Jesus, whether you want it to or not. And that it was admonishment and rebuke, but it was brilliant. And that changed a lot for me, really, because on the one hand, there was just this cognitive dissonance. On the one hand, I was talking about being a Christian. On the other hand, I was, talking about all the stuff that young comedians talk about, really. So that was a good lesson. But sanctification is an amazing thing, and it takes ages, but it works. It's like the keto diet.
Yeah, except it works.
yeah, that's right.
Except it works. So with the comedy routine and circuit, how did you meet many other Christians on there fairly early on, or was it all very secular?
Yeah, and as all of us would want to say, probably, the fact that something is secular doesn't make it inherently, bad. No. I've got loads of friends still from those early days in comedy. So my mate, who's still my best mate today, Tony Vino, he started around the same time as me, and he didn't start on the circuit quite as early as me. I knew that Milton Jones and Tim Vine were Christians, but they were already famous. So although I have had lots of contact with them over the years since, initially they felt a little bit detached. And I knew of Paul Carenza, who was actually only very new himself, but I knew of him. So I remember, though, being one of the, in The Great Escape, where at the train station, and they're all the escaped prisoners, but they're all dressed as sort of German civilians, and they're eyeing each other up and just, giving each other winks and things like that. I remember when I met Jo Enright for the first time, she's an amazing comedian. She's been in a lot of different sitcoms, The Job Lot and things like that. And I remember meeting her at a gig in Southport, and I was talking about being a Christian, and she said, "Are you a Christian?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I'm a Christian as well." And it was just amazing because I'd never met another Christian backstage at a gig before. And that was incredible. So now, in 2020, I mean, there's loads of us now at different levels. There's loads of Jesus followers on the comedy circuit, people writing for TV. Mm-hmm. And I suppose I've had an influence on that. I suppose people have seen how visible I am and how very early on I nailed my colours to the mast. And I'm probably still known. It's a bit more legitimate now because I am a preacher. But before I was a preacher, I was still probably known as being the Christian rather than the funny man. But that's because people love to stereotype and pigeonhole. So, yeah, there's a lot of Christians now. But in those early days, no, it was hard. It was hard. And it was a wing and a prayer.
Yeah. So are there more, do you think there are more Christians doing comedy, or is it that you know more of them now?
Oh, there's definitely more. And there's more people doing comedy. But so the overall number and the number per capita has gone up as well dramatically. But there weren't that many, and I could have counted on two hands the people back in 2005 who were doing it.
And that's pretty cool. That's quite nice, and especially I guess for you as well to have had some influence probably on that as well. It's quite funny when you mentioned Tim Vine and Milton Jones. When I thought of you two, I thought you do such very different comedy. Like there's nothing in common between the three of you. I love Tim Vine, Milton Jones as well. I think the three of you appeal to kind of all aspects that I find funny. In different ways, and like together, if the three of you could make one comedian, I would just probably listen to you all the time.
Yeah, I get that, and it's interesting because they are both very. They handle their self-disclosure very well on stage, because you don't learn very much about them on stage.
No,
and although Tim is very much the same off stage as he is on stage, Milton's very different. Whereas, although I play an exaggerated version of myself, I'm an avatar on stage. I am an avatar of me. So it is Andy Kind. And people, when they meet me off stage, they probably think, "Oh, you're not quite as energetic." But I don't think they think you're a totally different person.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. And that again has helped in terms of the preaching, because, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but what's been really helpful is that I've managed to bring all the skill set from comedy into preaching. There's things that have needed to change and evolve, but the skill set transfers 100% really.
Do you view that as kind of providence? I mean, kind of God sending you on that journey from comedy onto what you're doing now? Because I mean, it's very difficult, I think, to develop the skills that you have without doing that.
He definitely tricked me. No, he tricked me, definitely. Yeah, I'm serious. And we've had words about it. But yes, no, I remember, like you, Daniel, I think that you can go through phases where you don't have what you would call those spiritual experiences, those charismatic experiences. And I think, but partly, it tends to be, I would say that there's a correspondence. When I'm really into the apologetics, that's when I have the fewest spiritual experiences, I think. Just because you're sowing seeds in a different area, aren't you? So if I'm listening to William Lane Craig, then I'm probably not out on the streets praying for healing for people. If I'm listening to a lot of Bill Johnson or Robbie Dawkins or Todd White, I'm probably not looking at the modal ontological argument for God's existence.
It's quite an eclectic mix, though.
It is. I know, it's very interesting. It's a very interesting range, but again, I think it helps. It's all the same. Again, it's all the same job. It all works together. So
that is a weird mix. I don't think I've met anyone who would go from one end of the spectrum to, from William Lane Craig. You big Keller fanboy as well? You like
Tim Keller? Huge fanboy. Yeah.
I've yet to meet someone who doesn't like Keller.
We haven't interviewed anyone who doesn't like Tim Keller. I think maybe that's the sort of threshold
Kathy
that we have.
Keller doesn't like him.
Yeah.
She rang me up today.
So yeah, basically that's the sort of threshold for getting on the podcast. Do you like the big fan of Tim Keller?
Yeah.
It's awkward.
No
if
emails
they say
from
no.
us. It's going to be radio silence.
I can't talk to you
all the way to Bill Johnson and
and what's interesting about Keller is that he's a Calvinist and I'm not.
Right.
And yet I don't.
Sorry, I'm going to have to end this in.
And yet I just find his entire approach really gracious and grace-filled. And
whereas that's something Calvinists aren't known for.
I wouldn't say that. I think actually you find argumentative and bullish and crass people on the whole range of the spectrum.
Very diplomatic.
But it's easy to listen to
Kathy
somebody
Newman in that one. So you're really saying Arminians are going to hell?
So it is an interesting mix, isn't it? I got into apologetics as everybody else did through C.S. Lewis, and then was actually part of the steering committee for the 2011 Reasonable Faith Tour.
Wow.
Yeah, that was one of those experiences where I thought, how am I on this committee? Like, how has this happened? And the reason it happened was because I sent William Lane Craig an email saying, would you ever come back to the UK? And on the same day, I think he had 2 or 3 people asking that same question. So they took it seriously. So I hosted and organised the Manchester debate that he did with Peter Atkins, and it was the last debate of the tour, and it was probably a draw actually. And credit due to Peter Atkins, he did a very good spoiling job. He was basically the hatchet man. He was like I'm trying to think of an example. He was basically the sort of Martin Keown figure. He just man-marked William Lane Craig all the way through the debate. So anyway, I got really into apologetics because I really wanted to know that initially that I'd picked the right one. I'd picked the right faith because I'd had these experiences, but I was aware that Christians weren't the only people having spiritual experiences. And Christians weren't the only one trying to get to God. And so obviously that brings up questions, and that brings up doubts and worries. And I probably went through a universalist stage at one point, as I think lots of people do, because you think, actually, I can't cope with the idea that I just can't cope with all these strands of truth and evidence and all of that. And then getting into apologetics, I did it because I was really interested in knowing the truth and then being able to defend the truth. And for a long time, it was just, for me, it protected my faith and strengthened my faith. But now I do use it alongside the comedy, alongside the preaching, as a means of bringing people to Christ. But I also love the whole John Wimber idea of everybody gets to play. And I remember watching Todd White on YouTube for the first time, where he was out on the street and seeing people healed. And I remember thinking, if this is what it is, if this can happen, then I want it. I want to see this. I want to do this. I want the full range. And then when you read the book of Acts and you think, actually, they're doing the full range. They're demolishing arguments. They're going into these places and they're debating, but they're also seeing people raised and healed. And I want that as well, because otherwise, like, what's the point? If everyone doesn't get to play, well, that's a sort of Gnosticism, isn't it? In a sense, if it's only a sort of secret knowledge, which is actually how a lot of people in the Christian West live, as though they've got this secret knowledge or this divine spark. Actually, no, I want to be out there seeing God move in words and in power. The kingdom of God is a matter of power. So, yeah, I suppose I was thinking about this earlier as I was planning what I might say to you guys. I go through phases, a bit like an actor rehearsing a play. So I will go through an apologetics phase where I'll learn as much as I can on a particular subject, and then I will administer that. So whether that is, the fine-tuning argument or contrasting other religions, and then I'll really try and hit the streets and pray for healing and get words of knowledge and things like that. In the same way that an actor probably can't remember the lines to the play he did 2 years ago, but at the time, like he was in that zone. He was really fully embodying that. So I'm very method. I'm very method when it comes to what I do.
Interesting. So, Aaron, how's the quantum entanglement then? Is that going on?
No,
you started that today, but it didn't quite get there.
No, I've been reading about the Gnostics today.
All right, so you got that in there. That's good.
Yeah. So again,
we're doing well.
I'm very good.
That was great.
I sometimes watch my preaches back and think, oh, I don't remember saying that, because I think, and it comes from comedy. My biggest skill. By the way, I haven't ever quite learned how loud to talk over Zoom. I still haven't learned that. So I'm actually talking louder than normal. But apologies for that.
Zoom adjusts the levels, so you could probably, it might be a bit crackly for everyone else, but you'll be
right. This is the closest thing to a gig I've had in. It's the biggest audience I've had, apart from communion last Sunday. This is brilliant.
Nice. Well, it's us plus 5 others, so you're doing all right.
It's brilliant. Yeah.
Well, it might be
awesome.
3.
Yeah. So, sorry, what was the question?
Sorry. Yeah, I don't know if there was one. I think it was. So where I was kind of going is you're picking these apologetics talks. So does that feature in your comedy sets as well then? Because I'm really ignorant and I need to watch your show after the fact of talking to you. So how do you fit those in? Like, what kind of prep do you do other than reading lots about fine tuning? How does that become funny? Like, what kind of process do you do?
Yeah, I remember speaking to David Robertson, the Mad Scotsman, who I'm a huge fan of, but I also think he's totally mad. And I met him. I've only met him once, and I was asking. This was quite a few years ago, as I was looking to bring that apologetic stuff into comedy, and he just said, "Don't undersimplify things. So just keep it nice and simple." And so my show, which I know, Dan, you've seen the preaching version of.
I have, yeah.
My show, Hidden in Plain Sight, the full show, basically what I do is my 5 best bits of material, and then I designate each one of those stories with a theme. So there's a story about being trapped, so I use that as freedom. There's a story about my second daughter being born, so I use that as unconditional love. And I have these 5 things. And then I say, look, these 5 things are, if you like, minimal facts. These are things that you know to be true. Whatever your will, you know you were wired for purpose. You know you desire freedom. You know you want to be loved unconditionally. You know that some things are objectively wrong. You know that people have inherent value. And, you're talking specifically to the people in front of you. And then you're just building a case. So it's sort of somewhere between inductive and abductive reasoning. You're saying, look, we've told these stories, and here are these things that these stories bring out. And then what makes the best sense of these things that we've talked about? These are your, if you like, these are your little stories. So the preaching version of Hidden in Plain Sight is called Big Story, Little Story, where I talk about the things that, whatever else is true out there, there's stuff that is definitely true for you and in you that you definitely believe. So that's your little story. And I say, we're looking for a big story that makes the best sense of your little story. So again, I just love the, it's a William Lane Craig phrase. We're only making modest claims. We're simply saying what makes the best sense. And in that, I'm very influenced by Gary Habermas with his arguments for the resurrection, because he simply says, here are the 4 facts that even the most skeptical of scholars, New Testament scholars, will agree on. So, okay, we'll just use those facts. Or he does it with the books of the New Testament, doesn't he? So the letters of the New Testament, there's 7. There's only 7 of the New Testament letters that the most skeptical scholars will say are authentic. And Habermas says, well, okay, fine. I can still use those to show you that the resurrection and Jesus is still the best explanation of the stuff that's in there, that the resurrection of Jesus is the best explanation. And I just love that approach because it's non-confrontational. It uses the opposition's weight against them, if you like. And it also avoids kind of meandering off into weird by conversations about angels and healing. I mean, I talked about healing. I love seeing people heal, but I do not use stories of healing to persuade people of the truth of the gospel. I go for I ask them, what is it that you believe to be true? You tell me what's true. Tell me what you know is true. And I'll use that to show you that Jesus makes the most sense of that. So again, there's nothing new under the sun. We're standing on the shoulders of the great apologists, but it's really exciting to be able to bring that into a comedy show. But in terms of, so just to answer the question, Phil, I don't try and make apologetics funny. I try and segue from comedy into the apologetics.
Interesting.
It's good. I like how you do that. And I'm not sure if you're aware, there's a Christian philosopher called C. Stephen Evans, and he very much takes this approach. He talks about these things as natural signs. And it's very much, as you were talking, I was kind of thinking it sounds very much like what he does in terms of like natural theology. He sees natural theology as not as a way of, well, it can show evidence for God, but its primary purpose is kind of to attack naturalism. So he kind of says, look, here are these 5 natural signs that and actually Christianity, well, the fact that God exists is the best explanations of the things we know are true. So like you said, you appeal to the things we all agree are true, and it's trying to actually sort of raise some doubt on skeptics, agnostics, atheists. Actually, the things they already know are not well explained by naturalism, which I think is quite a nice way of doing it, because it's not confrontational. And you're appealing. You're not introducing any new knowledge. You're basically trying to show there's a better interpretation of what you already know, and it's and it's God.
So what I would say is, when I'm doing this show, when I'm preaching, I would say, I don't think you're wrong. I think you're right. The things that you believe are right. The thing that's wrong is your worldview, because your worldview doesn't allow for the things that you know are right. So get a better one. I'm deliberately kind of bullish at that point, but again, it's we want to affirm the person while still being able to say the argument is wrong. And I know you've talked to Glenn, and I think Glenn is brilliant at that sort of approach. He would take that approach of, look, there's a better story. There's a better story. And I was talking to someone today about the whole pride parade and how we approach that as Christians. And again, you get a lot of people who are just very binary and very sort of tribal. But I think missionally, the best approach to take is to say, look, these people who are celebrating pride, if it's a choice between pride and shame, well, let's celebrate pride. That's fine. But we celebrate pride in the way that we would celebrate passing a driving theory test. It's good, but it's not the big one. It's not the end of the story. So pride is better than shame, but freedom in Christ is better than pride. So I want to say to my friends, and I was saying to my friend today, it's great that we can stand with people and say, you know what? you are inherently valuable. And the things that your movement believe to be true, that love should win, that people are inherently valuable, that that freedom is a thing that we should go after. Absolutely, we agree. And again, I want to say, let me give you the best story where these things find their fullness. These things find their fullness. So again, it's not I'm right and you're wrong. It's that, what you're experiencing now, it's even better. It's even better than that. That's why I'll probably never preach in the States.
I think that's a really important aspect. I wrote a blog piece on that while wrestling with the whole BLM movement, seeing Christians denounce BLM all over the place. And it's very much the language go through their statement. Yeah, there's things Christians can disagree with, but what are the key buzzwords that are actually we can look at them in biblical ways and go, actually, it makes better sense of these words to go through the Christian worldview. You want liberation, well, you're going to have full liberation and justice and all of that in the fullest sense of the words, not just the way that you're using them here in this movement. And I think, well, as you say, we're building on the shoulders of giants. Paul does that in Acts. I can never remember which chapter, but the Areopagus, I can never say it in Greece. Yeah, there you go. And look, you've got all these gods. You're really religious. Like, he compliments their religiosity and then says, look, you've got this unknown God. Let me tell you about him.
Acts 17, isn't it? I think.
Yeah. If that's a framework, is that whole story. Let's get excited about this story that we have that makes the best sense of the world. And I find a lot of times engaging with certain strands of Christianity and the evangelism technique isn't a story as much as there's no middle ground. It's well, I mean, you can say this, I guess, but you're dead in your sins is the first thing that comes out of their mouth. And like, well, that's not very nice.
Because
it's true, but
it's true and also meaningless. Yeah, because so on the M56 on the way from Manchester to Chester, there is a billboard, or there was, I don't live there anymore, that said the wages of sin is death. Now, I agree with that. That's true. I agree. It's also meaningless because it doesn't resonate with anybody. What do you mean, the wages of sin?
What is sin?
What is sin? And like, why are we being paid in wages? Like, I just get my PAYE at the end of the month. So it doesn't relate. And I think this is where we've got to be able to show some nuance. I just love a bit of nuance. And
it's a good word.
It's a great word. And I did a French degree, so I know where it comes from. But, to be able to say that something is true, and not that we change the truth of the gospel, but we have to find ways of filtering the truth of the gospel into our culture and society. And filtering doesn't mean diffusing. It just means filtering so that the people who do have ears to hear can understand what it is that they're hearing. And you would speak to people. You do speak to people who would say, "Oh no, we just give the gospel. We give the gospel." Yeah, I know we give the gospel, but again, within the New Testament, as you just mentioned in Paul didn't just come up and say, "You guys are idiots, and you've got to all become Christians." Even when he was before Agrippa in Acts 26, he talks about the history of the Jews, and he says, I'm confident that the king knows what I'm talking about because it hasn't been done in a corner. And so it's that approach again. It's pointing to what you already know and saying the trajectory from what you know is towards Jesus. So I'm sorry, I don't want to be too kind of bullish at all, but I do find it frustrating when, and it's not even that I have a problem with people who are overly conservative or overly liberal. I just love nuance. I just want some nuance. I want things to be able to be held in tension, because the Bible is full of paradoxes, and they do work together.
there is something about the middle road. And trying to take.
There's only two roads in the gospel, Daniel.
But there's
changing the gospel.
End meeting for all.
Over. Cut his mic.
Get out.
But there's something about taking the best from both sides, because I think I have some sort of conservative gene. I am by nature conservative, not Tory, but conservative in the sense that,
to clarify.
in terms of just the way I perceive the world. But I realize that that's quite unhelpful, because the way I naturally approach certain issues completely alienates 50%. In fact, because I'm in London, probably like 90% of people. And so it's trying to say, well, how can I communicate what I think with the language of someone who is more liberal, or more sort of left wing, maybe politically, and it's in that nuance. It's trying to say, actually, no, even though I don't think like that, I can see value in seeing the world through that lens. It's not always reciprocated, but I think it's it is in that middle road, that nuance, trying to take the best and trying to see faults in your own thinking as well. I was actually thinking, okay, I can see this is good, about actually, because I view the world like this, there's also a weakness. Actually, I emphasize this issue to the detriment of this, whereas on the other side they do the opposite, and so we're just completely on a different spectrum. So I agree with you. Big fan of nuance space. That was a long way of saying I like nuance.
We all like nuance. And just the point that you made earlier, just to repeat it, because I think it's so valuable, is that point where you're like, I ask where people are at before I tell. And Tim Keller is great at doing that, sort of figuring out the culture. Right, who am I actually speaking to? Okay, here's the story. And I know that there are so many people that want to be evangelists and are doing their best to evangelize, but they go, here's the truth prepackaged. I figured this story. Sin happened. We need a savior. Otherwise we're going to hell. Jesus died, took our punishment. You can be alive in him. Off we go. And that's all true. But who's asking those questions? And there's more to Jesus's death than heaven and hell, and figuring out actually Jesus's death and the life we have in him meets all the range of desires in so many more ways than your innate instinct to fulfill those desires does. And there's a couple of people figuring this out. Peter Dre, I think his name is, from UCCF, is working on. He did a presentation recently on the different desires and the way that Christ fulfills them. And it's just so important to look at that and recognize that our culture in the West is kind of limited to certain ideas, at least our culture in Western Christianity, I should say, because I think our culture is moving on in different areas where we're still clinging on to this one way of telling the story. So to kind of lead from that, how do you, because I'm guessing you go into a comedy set, you can't exactly from the off ask your audience, what do you believe? Like, how do you prepare to like figure out your audience when you're doing the same set in different audiences, I guess?
So if I'm in a comedy club and I'll just do comedy, and so I won't try and preach, because I don't really want to get put in a wicker man, so I won't do that. But if I'm just doing a comedy club, then actually my critical witness is backstage with the other comedians.
I see what you did there. That was really nice. You said it again, and I can crop it out later.
I'll have a sip of tea while you celebrate that.
I'm glad I noticed. It shows I'm listening. Sorry, I just completely derailed you. Carry on.
No, it's fine. My Hidden in Plain Sight show is exclusively done to mixed audiences, but within a church environment. So you basically want a critical mass of Christians. You probably want sort of 55% to 60% Christians, 40% guests. because that way you know that if it turns into a rumble, you're probably okay. And again, just over half. It's all about a tipping point. Everything's about a tipping point. If you get 60% of the audience laughing, well, 30 of the remaining 40 will start laughing as well. And 10% of an audience not laughing is not really noticeable. Not that it ever happens at my gigs,
of course,
obviously, because I'm ace. But but yes, my Hidden in Plain Sight show is done exclusively within church settings, and it will be set out like a comedy club. And I'll still do the comedy, and I'll still build the relationship, because, as you said, Phil, some people take the approach of, well, this is the truth. Yeah, but the truth is ultimately personal. Truth is ultimately personal. And in the beginning was the Word. So story itself is wired into the universe. And so when I'm taken to the stage, I'm not really interested in giving a series of facts, because covenant always overrides commandments. Covenant always overrides commandments. You will be faithful to the person that you love the most. And for most people in our society, that person is me, or that person is us. Not me.
Not you personally, but the individual.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know.
I need to talk to my wife.
Yeah. Well, she does follow me on Instagram.
She does. So, she's a big fan.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, but you know what I mean? You will be faithful to the person that you love the most. So if you're a Christian, for instance, and you believe all of the rules and the guidelines and, the ramifications in the Bible, but really the person you love the most is you, at some point you will break away from Jesus's commands, because unless you love him and have that personal relationship with him, then you will make yourself the God of your life, the king or queen of your life. And the covenant you have with yourself will override any commandments, because they will simply seem like health and safety guidelines. They will simply seem like a line of best fit through morality. So the point is that it's personal. We are supposed to have a personal relationship with God, because God is personal. The Trinity is interpersonal. And so when I'm on stage, my aim is to build a personal relationship with the audience. And I do that through banter, through chatting, through the story. So when we get to the crunch, when we get to the actual gospel message, it feels like a friend sharing his truth, if you like. And I'm not really a huge postmodernism fan. So end meeting for all. But
conversation over. We can't have that.
But I just mean in terms of the way it comes across. Mm-hmm. So it just becomes much more palatable, rather than here is a stranger trying to, impugn me with like objectivism. And so that's the approach that I take. I try to build a relationship with somebody. When you laugh with somebody, it becomes psychologically impossible to hate them. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And when you build common ground through laughter, you can build stuff on that. So the comedy bit is all about building a common ground, so that they don't hate me. But also, when the mouth is open for laughter, you can shove in a bit of food for thought as well. And that's the approach I take.
You do, because I've heard you twice, definitely once. But definitely once. But I thought you did such a great job of it, because I think my sort of natural disposition is to assume, again, I don't know how you think of yourself, either a Christian who is a comedian or a Christian comedian. The first one. And my base assumption is that they're rubbish. But because I knew you weren't. But generally, if someone says, "Oh, we've got a Christian comedian coming," I'm a bit like, it's going to be like dad really jokes. It's going to be rubbish. I'm not going to invite anyone because I'll be ashamed. So in light of that, having heard you, I thought you did it great. I mean, what I liked about what you did is that like the way you engaged with the audience, but also I appreciate how there's sort of a line, within a church, and you get very close to where the line is, and I really enjoyed that. Because it was a little bit awkward but fun as well.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously intentional. Like there's this line, and you never go over it, but you get so close. And it's so beautiful to watch, and I love that kind of like awkward humor. Just thinking, I bet they think he's going to say that, or he's alluding to that. And it's great. But then,
and what you want to do in those situations, again, every church gig is different. And the one I did 2 gigs. I think your wife was at the first one and you were at the second one, mate.
Yes,
I don't think you were at the first one.
Yeah.
So at that church, it was obviously a lot of 20s, 30s with a wider spread as well. But it was the key demographic with the 20s, 30s, and you can, because they understand comedic nuance better. They're not just looking for set up punchline. They understand surrealism. They understand sort of that post-irony that became very popular in the noughties through people like Ricky Gervais. So you can take it further with them before they get worried. Whereas with sort of the older generation, they do worry more because they get fearful that you're going to say something, and it's not that they're prudes, it's just that they don't know what's happening. And so the first 10 minutes of a show is simply working out where those lines are. Where are the boundaries, so that you can go right up to the boundaries and then bring it back.
I think the environment must shape the expectations as well, because I think if you're a Christian who goes to a comedy club, that line, if we're being honest, is different. You're willing to listen to things that if you said it in the church wouldn't be accepted. It would be whereas I think you do attune yourself to the environment you're in. So within a church it is different. But I often wondered, and it got me thinking, so when you go to a church the first time, when you go back, are they usually busier? Because I would assume, because I'd say I might be someone, I'd be like, I go and listen, I think actually no, he's solid. I'll tell A, B, and C, D. Let's invite you to this one because I know it's going to be good. Yeah,
almost invariably, the second time round is more full, and it's one of those things I've just had to nail to the cross a little bit, because after 15 years, it hasn't changed. It doesn't, It was the same in 2007, where people would come up at the end and say, "Oh, if I'd known it was going to be that good, I would have invited people." Even though I'm way better than I was in 2007, the gigs don't change. The gigs are the same. And you just get to the point where you think, well, look, it is what it is, and I'm here to have fun. Interestingly, I've never really thought about this before, but I think when people go to a comedy night in a church, they're expecting the comedian to come out and be, "Hi guys, oh, it's really great to see you. Oh, God bless you for coming. We're going to have a lot of fun tonight. And isn't it funny when you're washed in the blood of the lamb," and stuff like that. Just really weird, cheesy stuff.
Yeah.
So when I'm in a church, when I'm doing a church gig, and I didn't do quite this when I was with you, because a few years ago now, but what I started doing more recently is I will come out and I will just say, "Okay, so welcome. It's great that you're here. Thanks for being here. This is going to be really good. You don't need to look scared. Some of you look a bit, so you don't. I'm really good at this. Honestly, you don't need to worry. Don't laugh. I'm really good at this. It's going to be brilliant. I know what I'm doing. And I'll just be quite stern with them, only for a little bit, because what that does, particularly for the guests, it breaks that expectation of he's going to be really cheesy. Because all of a sudden, here's this skinhead who's come out and he's just owning the stage. He hasn't been funny yet, but he knows what he's doing up there. He looks like he belongs there. And so that relaxes the non-Christians, which relaxes the Christians, and then you can be funny. And then you do have to be very quickly funny after that. So
if you're not funny, then it's just...
I can only think of one occasion where that has not worked.
Tell us about that one occasion. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, well, I think I went in too aggressive. They were so scared.
You will find me funny.
Yeah, I found them in cocoons at the end of the gig. They were just sort of
just rocking.
Whereas if I'm doing a comedy club, I actually be more like the expectation of a Christian, because I'm usually hosting the gig, and in that case, I want people. I know that I know there's probably 3 quite aggressive, street smart comedians coming up. So my job is to put the audience at their ease, and it's almost the flip. You put them at their ease, not by going in aggressively, but by saying, hey guys, you're just so welcome tonight. You're really welcome tonight. We're gonna have a really nice time. So I take I go against the grain in both of those situations. It's an upside down kingdom.
Could you tell us about your worst gig?
Yes. Oh, you want me to now?
Yeah. Like, what
yes.
constitutes a bad gig? Is it just like, is it just people not laughing, or is it like
a bad
like people laugh, but you know it didn't go as well as it could have? Like, just what is it? The one you consider your worst gig might be different to what someone else might think.
And I think it's very easy to feel dissatisfied with a gig in different ways. So the 2 gigs I did for that church where I met you, Dan. The second one, which you were at, I enjoyed much more than the first one, and that was really because they both went well. They both went very well, but I felt like the first one was a bit flat, and I don't think that was anyone's fault, but I just found it difficult to generate energy. Whereas at the second one, I didn't find it difficult to generate the energy in the room. For me, a disappointing gig is where the audience never quite come with me to the full degree, where they enjoy it, but they never really come along for the ride. And so when you get to the end of the show, and my show is increasingly long stories. So if you haven't got them by the time you're doing some of the long stories, you're basically, it's like running up a hill in hot weather. So that's difficult. But a bad gig, I suppose a bad gig is where I've been less than good. And that gig can still go well, but I might have done it badly. And invariably that is if I have not prepared. And I don't mean written jokes, because I know the set most of the time. I mean, I don't now. I don't remember what it's like to be on stage. I'm not totally convinced that I'm the person you want to be talking to. I'm like Christian Bale in Empire of the Sun. I can't remember what my parents look like, let alone what it means to be a comedian.
What a sad movie.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, you've made me laugh.
Perfect comedy.
I don't know what to do with myself.
Yeah, so there's 2 ways of gauging a gig: your own performance, and then the crowd's performance. And some people want to say, if you're funny, you're funny, and a bad workman never blames his tools. And that's true to a degree. You can't go around blaming audiences all the time, but you can have bad audiences, and you can have difficult gigs that are difficult, regardless of what you try and do. If it's the case that all comedians are equally funny at all times, under any circumstance, if there's no context, if there's no nuance, then I could go up to a bus station now, start telling jokes, and have people in fits of laughter. But that wouldn't happen because the context is wrong. And the difficult thing about doing church gigs is that although most of the time they nail it, when you step into the venue, how much effort they've put into that being a comedy night. Does it feel like it's a comedy night, or does it feel like you're underdressed and you're going to be standing on the chancel steps and they've got 6 members of the Mothers Union? I mean, there isn't any redeemable feature about something like that. That is never going to be a good gig. So yeah, I judge my own performance often quite harshly, and then I judge the gig in terms of the context of what was possible. So I talk about a glass ceiling, and most gigs are out of 10, so you can get 10. But some churches you go into, or some gigs anywhere really, it's not just churches. I'm not trying to defame the church circuit, but you go into some venues and you know that the most you can do is 7 out of 10. That the best you can get is 7 out of 10. That's the best the gig can be, and that's difficult because if you've got guests, for instance, if you guys weren't Christians and I saw you in an audience, like, you would be the people I would be aiming the show at. So here are youngish men, guests, and I want to impress them. These are the people I'm going at. If you are surrounded by a load of retired Anglicans, or actually Anglicans are quite free.
Can you retire from being an Anglican?
No, you can't. But you can retire from a job and then become a professional Anglican. But let's just say retired religious people, then they're not going to enjoy the show. And so you guys aren't going to enjoy the show because you're going to be kind of suffocated by this apathy. So anyway, there's lots of ways of looking at a gig, but yeah, most gigs are great.
Have you ever turned up?
Hard. Some are hard. And the worst ever, I will tell you about the worst ever, actually.
Come on. Go on.
And this is, my voice has gone slightly squeaky because I'm nervous about it.
That makes it even better.
Because I've just remembered it. So when people ask me on stage, what's your worst gig? I do a jokey one, but I'll tell you the real one. The real one was the summer of 2015. So it was only 5 years ago.
Wow.
And it was at the One event in Lincoln, which is a really great Christian festival. And I'd done...
Is it the only event? Sorry, I'm guessing it wasn't the only event in Lincoln. They had others. They just called it the One event.
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
that was
That's all right.
That was terrible.
Sorry. Just leave it to the professional.
Phil, you've created the sort of atmosphere that I created on the night. So,
I just wanted to make people feel welcome in the experience, you know.
So it was a really weird thing because I'd done Greenbelt earlier on that day and absolutely nailed it. I'd done an afternoon show and nailed it. And then I drove to Lincoln and I performed better than I had at Greenbelt, to almost no laughter. Almost no laughter. And it was a big crowd. And the reason this was the worst event ever, the worst gig ever, was because I couldn't understand why it was happening. The bad gigs tend to be bad gigs before you ever get on stage. You can kind of call what the bad gigs are. And similar with good gigs, really, or with the great gigs. You know a great gig before you get on stage, and a terrible gig. But this one just totally threw me. And I just wasn't ready for it. They laughed a little bit at first, and then they just stopped laughing. And it threw me, and I looked thrown. And I almost never look thrown. But I looked thrown. And I learned after the fact that they just had a really miserable weekend of weather. So it was the bank holiday Monday night, and it was 10 o'clock on the evening, and they were all going home, and they were just knackered. But it was still a terrible gig. And no one, and this is the thing, audiences don't take context into account. This is a really interesting thing about the psychology of comedy. An audience will not take context into account in the same way that, you know, if you're sitting in the grandstand of a football pitch and you've got someone taking free kicks just before dusk, and then the same person taking free kicks just after dusk where the light is not as good, the person watching will not take that into account. How many free kicks did he score? Same person might, let's say he gets 9 out of 10 and then 5 out of 10. The person in the grandstand is leaving thinking, oh, he's not as good. He's not as good anymore. They don't take context into account. It's the same with comedy audiences. So no one was leaving that gig thinking, well, in fairness, we're all a little bit tired and we've had a miserable weekend. They will simply think, he didn't make us laugh. And it's true. I really didn't make them laugh. But that was so weird because it's the most inexplicable bad gig. Because even if I wasn't on good form, and actually I think that the summer of 2015 was probably the best. Up until the summer of last year was the best I'd ever been. And then I dropped off a bit, and it took me a while to get back up. But it was so inexplicable because even if I was not really on form, I should have had enough jokes and tricks to get something from them. And it was like getting blood from a stone. And it wasn't their fault. Like, again, this is where I wouldn't blame
the audience, yeah.
The audience, but I wouldn't blame myself either. It's just the context didn't allow for what I wanted to happen. So yeah, I don't have nightmares about that anymore. But I had shell shock. Actually, I had a sort of very low level PTSD, and it took me 6 months. I remember doing a gig that December in Burnley with a friend of mine called Mark, and he said, "You got your joy back tonight," and I was like, "Yeah, that's it. I've got my joy back," because I'd lost it. Like I was turning up to gigs petrified because all of a sudden I thought, I don't know how to judge whether this is going to go well or not.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
That's scary.
Yeah.
So we've gone for an hour and haven't really discussed at all how the connection between comedian and preacher mixes. So I'm intrigued with just as you transition, because you're doing more preaching now, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
So as you transition to being a preacher, what did you take from being a comedian, and what have you put into preaching? Let's start there. What are the key things of being a comedian that you think help preaching?
Yeah, so Augustine said that preaching should do three things primarily: probare, delectare, and flectare. I don't speak Latin, so but I can tell you what those things mean. So probare is to instruct and to prove. Delectare is to rivet and delight, which I think is a really interesting one. And flectere is to stir and move to action. Now, most preaching that we might have seen, it tends to just be number one, probare, to instruct and prove. And sometimes you might get flectere, to stir and move to action. But how many times, a rhetorical question, how many times have we been listening to a preach which has riveted and delighted us? Like, not loads. And so for me, that was really reassuring that this is not sort of Tim Keller saying this. It isn't a Tim Keller book, but it's but it's actually.
I thought you'd been reading Augustine. You didn't have to. It sounded like Keller, so it made sense.
Smoke and mirrors, mate. Smoke and mirrors. So I think when I read that, I was like, okay, yeah. So it is okay. It is okay to delight people when preaching. It is okay to have them riveted. It is okay to engage the intellect and the emotions. And maybe it's more appropriate to say, or more accurate to say, that preachers major on either the intellectual or the emotional, which is why people get accused of just giving motivational talks, or some preachers can just be accused of being dull and boring. And I'm not thinking of anyone in particular. You know, I have huge respect for anyone doing it. But for me, I want to be able to do all three. And I'm better at the second one. I'm better at riveting and delighting than I am at instructing and proving. Although, yeah, I think all my skill set in an ideal world potentially it makes up those three things. So when I started doing preaching, when I preached for the first time, I just used my three best bits of material and put some Jesus around it, some Jesus cotton wool. And I was what I've learned looking back now, I was quite crass. The way I spoke was quite crass, because on stage as a comedian, you can be crass. You are allowed to be the alpha male. You are supposed to self-elevate. Comedy is about self-elevation. The gospel is about self-denial. Preaching is about self-denial. To a degree, there's an aspect to which you have to get out of the way and let God do what God wants to do. So you are not the star of the preach, whereas you are the star of the comedy show. So I brought over all my skill set, and I simply mean by skill set, being able to work without notes, being able to respond on the spot, so not being thrown by distractions, being able to read body language and control your own body language, being able to bring in intonation and nuance, and we've used the word nuance so much, but the different affectations, being able to change pace and change tone and control the mood and control the energy in the room, which most preachers, I think preachers do it, but I don't think they necessarily know how they're doing it.
Yeah.
So that's what I brought over. But what I also brought over was this sort of slightly narcissistic, bolshy, domineering side to it. And that's had to be massively softened. That's had to really be challenged. But I've got a couple of close friends who kind of really helped me on my journey. And particularly, certainly in those early days, I'd have conversations where they basically just say, mate, that was, you shouldn't have said that.
It's helpful to have that kind of person around you, though.
Yeah. And it's just the attitude. So I remember actually doing a preach in a gig's a gig, doing a preach in Bedford, where I talked about how someone I knew was a Christian in the same way that David Cameron was a Christian. He had British values. And I would never think of doing anything like that now because it's so politicized, not intentionally.
Yeah.
But this is one of the examples. You say that as a comedian and no one's bothered because it's funny, it's lighthearted. You say it in a preach, all of a sudden, what's he saying? What's the point he's making? People are looking, they're not looking for the jokes when you're preaching, they're looking for the point. And they're looking for the heart as well. They're looking for the heart. So you can still be alpha. You can still be alpha as a preacher, but you have to be a crucified alpha male. And you have to be a redeemed narcissist. So that's been the journey, really, as I've moved into preaching. And it's not even, I don't try to be funny as much when I'm preaching anymore, but that's just because I don't feel like a fraud in the same way. Yeah. When I started preaching, I felt such a fraud. And now I don't. And so the comedy comes naturally out of who I am. It comes organically out of who I am. But I'm not trying to force the comedy when I'm preaching. And when I'm preaching for my own church, Redeemer King in Chesterfield, I'm almost never using comedy because they don't know me as the comedian. None of them have ever seen me do a gig. I've been there for nearly 2 years. None of them have ever seen me do a gig. So you just play to the people. You play to the crowd, don't you? You play to the crowd. There's a phrase linked to the Edinburgh Festival where you play the audience. If one person comes to the show and they want the show to go ahead, you do the show. So you play to the crowd.
So what's your role in the church? You talked about yourself as a preacher, an evangelist. I know is it a promedian? I might have made that up. Do you call yourself?
That's the compound noun that I invented. Yeah.
I like it. I like people that create terms. So yeah. What is it you're doing in the church now? And do you not do comedy anymore now?
I do comedy.
Right.
So I am on leadership at Redeemer King. It's a church run by Carl Beach, who's an amazing evangelist. And
I've heard of him.
Head of Christian Vision for Men, big men's ministry.
Oh, yeah.
He's the senior pastor. And then I'm the evangelist. So I do 2 days a week. And sort of Carl and I interchange the preaching. So we're doing sort of 1 week on, 1 week off during lockdown, which is exhausting, but that's another story. And then, so I oversee the mission really. So we do stuff on the streets and I run Alpha and try and instill some gospel content into all the different ministries that the church runs. And then at the weekends though, I'm still doing comedy and I'm still doing preaching elsewhere if I'm not at Redeemer King. So my ideal scenario is a kind of Saturday night, Sunday morning somewhere where I'll do a comedy night on the Saturday night, just comedy, a little bit of an interview, and then on the Sunday morning I'll come and I'll preach. I'll maybe do the preaching version of Hidden in Plain Sight, and in some cases the people who've been guests on the Saturday will come back on the Sunday, and that's a good opportunity for people to do that. So I am primarily a preacher. I identify as a preacher primarily, but just because it's easier that way now to not be called Christian comedian.
Yeah.
And ironically, I'm actually closest to being Christian comedian than I ever have been, because I am now preaching and doing a bit of comedy. But I'm a promedian is a handy. It's just a handy moniker because it stops. It's quite interesting, and it's just a compound noun of those two things. I am both a preacher and a comedian. I am fully both of those things. I have two natures, and I enjoy both of them. And I can do either of them individually, but the dream and what I'm trying to go for more and more is to merge them together, because I just don't think I don't know what I can do really, but if I can get it right, I think it's potential that I could produce a type of art or performance that we don't really have. You know, we've got amazing communicators in the church, and we've got some brilliant comedians, but we don't have many people, if any, who are able and willing and desirous to do those things simultaneously, professionally. So I've seen it done, but I've seen it done badly. I've never seen it done well. And so my aim really would be to be able to do, I suppose, a sort of funnier, Britisher Rob Bell, probably more evangelical in a British sense. But do you know what I mean? That sort of
very good communicator. The person I had in mind that I can think of, there's two that have had impacts on my faith, partly because they spoke at Soul Survivor when I was malleable as a mind, and the two that I remember as being hilarious, poignant, and truthful were J. John when he spoke, and Mike Pilavacci.
Yeah.
We're able to get humor in there, get you laughing, get you alongside, and then they sort of sucker punch you with some gospel in there, and you go, okay, that was needed. And it sounds like you've got a particular idea in mind though. Like, what forum would that be in? Would that still be in comedy clubs or a whole nother circuit? Or
I think it would be the Saturday night, and Hidden in Plain Sight, the show that I've been doing at the moment, that is it. Okay. And so that's a sort of Saturday night show, and we've seen people become Christians through it, which is great.
Amazing.
But it's probably it's a 2-hour show really. It's quite long, but yeah, and I'm going to turn that into a DVD. So I think that doing I want to use the model of comedy whereby, you know, you do a show and you record it and you put it out and then you do a new show. And I want it to be comedy shows that also preach the gospel in an effective way. And Hidden in Plain Sight is my best gospel presentation with my best material. And yes, it's riveted together. It doesn't necessarily, it's not quite as purely mingled as I'd like it to be, but it's the best I can do for now. And I think, I mean, I love J. John and Pilavacci, and you're right. They're both very funny. I would hope that there's actually another level to go, because they wouldn't be able to do a comedy club. No. And I come from the comedy clubs. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm trying to do is to bring that level of sharpness, comedic sharpness, into the preaching. Yeah. Just to give it that extra something, that sort of preaching plus. And I'm just kind of externally processing here, so I'm not trying to draw comparisons too much. Again, I massively respect J. I mean, no one puts up numbers like J. John.
Yeah. I mean, so what you're saying is that he's not a funny guy. That's why.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Thanks, Kathy.
There's the headline.
There it is. Yeah, I'll crop it out and I'll put it in bold white writing. Andy Kine slags off J. John.
No, I mean, like the thing is, it's such a unique skill set that what you have. So it's quite rare because it's not even doing the two separate things. It's also that you're interested in the fact that you will read around the fine tuning argument and are interested in kind of philosophical arguments for God. And I think as a comedian, understanding culture as well, having a kind of understanding of what's what the cultural moment and what's sort of going on, what people are kind of what's going to resonate with the audience and things. So it's I can't imagine there'll be too many people out there like with the skill set that you have.
That's right, and I'm definitely on the right track, and I'm excited, and I'm experimenting, and not always getting it right, but sometimes getting it right and getting better at it. And I think what's interesting, I did quite a few. I basically on the carol service circuit last year, I basically followed Adrian Holloway around. So basically, the gigs that he'd done the previous year, I did some of those the year just gone. And what I noticed was that I was really kind of getting into it and was really smashing it out the park, I felt. But in terms of the numbers of responses, they were good, but they weren't anything like what Holloway gets at the moment. And that's been really good, because I just thought, okay, so it's not simply about numbers, but in terms of numbers, I actually think he's right up there. He and J. John are right up there. Holloway is amazing, and I think at the moment what I probably do is I probably give people entertainment and lots to think about. What I probably don't do very well at the moment is getting people over the line into a commitment within the space of 40 minutes, and I'd like to be better at that. And it's not necessarily what I'm trying to do, because what I'm trying to do is to give them something to think about. But equally, if you said, would you like those numbers? Would you like to see 25 people putting their hands up at a student carol service? Yes. So the great thing is that, again, we're following in the footsteps of the people who've gone ahead of us. And although I have a skill set that nobody else has, I've got to be humble enough to learn from everybody that I come across. And that's why I have a range of interests. I want to take the best from William Lane Craig. I want to take the best from Keller. I want to take the best from Todd White. I want to take the best from Adrian Holloway and J. John and Pilavacci. And actually, I probably do take things from all of those people. So, and it's not acting. Preaching isn't acting, but it's, again, a similar process whereby you are looking at what you can help to faithfully administer the word of God. So the word of God doesn't need any selling because it sells itself. But the person carrying it can work on themselves. And so I think that's all I'm trying to do. I do want to be, and this might seem, you might not hear people say this very often, I want to be the best preacher I can be.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a calling to be. I mean, I've definitely referred this in a conversation with Dan before, but one of my favorite passages about that is Colossians 4, where it's pray that God opens the door, but I need to speak with clarity. Is basically the gist. And we have to speak clearly, and that's why we go about contextualizing the gospel for the audiences in the first place. And if we fumble it, well, there's grace for that, but we should be learning, and we should be continuing to learn in ourselves. And I find preaching is often incredibly exhausting. At least I know I've preached well when I'm exhausted by it, if that makes sense. I've not just given some information, but I'm exhausted because it's challenged my own heart, and I've actually bared a bit of my own heart to those listening. And so it's quite interesting hearing you talk about the sort of self-denial and versus the lifting yourself up. I think there's definitely something about being on stage but directing everything upwards is quite a hard thing to do. Like every story you share that might be relate to me, but I'm not wanting you to look at me in that way.
Yeah, that's it. Don't look at me. Don't look at me.
I just hold a big mirror up while you like reflect it to the ceiling while you.
Yeah.
That's a different way of going about it. But
whilst also understanding that he has called you for who you are.
Yeah.
And I think obviously, you know, we haven't pre-planned these questions, so I am externally processing, and
it's all good.
It may be that I'll look back on this when I watch this back and think, oh, I wouldn't have said that in quite that same way. But I think one of the things that I dislike is this false humility. Like, as a comedian, I'm not naturally modest. That's not my culture. But equally, if someone says to me, that was a good preach, on the one hand, you want to say, it's not, I don't care whether you thought I was good. Like, what is Jesus saying to you about it?
Mm-hmm.
But if someone wants to say to me, you're a good preacher, I'm not going to deny that because I know that I am, because I work really hard at it.
Mm.
And I've spent 15 years becoming a really good comedian, not like a top class, amazing world beating comedian, but like an excellent comedian.
Mm.
And I've brought the skill set. So yeah, I'm really good at preaching. That doesn't turn into numbers. And that's where the humility has to come in.
Mm.
Like, that doesn't lead anyone to Christ. But
it's also just being able to accept the compliment, though.
Yeah.
Like,
and I'm very good at accepting compliments.
we'll take compliments. Like, that's okay.
But you know what I mean? I just don't think there's this. It's very British, isn't it? As no, I'm not. Oh, I'm
the Lord.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my identity is in Christ, and He's working in me, so it should look good. It should look good.
I like that. Okay.
He created the universe working behind
that's
this.
it.
Like,
You're right.
Yeah. My best mate was up there with me, and he creates the universe. Like, of course it was good.
It got me thinking earlier when we were thinking. I was talking to my wife about you coming on. It got me thinking about whether does God have a sense of humor? Because I often think that there's probably a subset of Christians who think a Christian being a comedian is kind of, I don't know, it's not necessarily a profession that a Christian should be in, because we don't usually think of God as having a sense of humor. But is that something you thought about? Does God have a sense of humor? Is God, I don't know. It just came into me earlier. I was just thinking, I know it's not some sort of essential attribute of God, as far as I'm aware. I don't think Aquinas sort of ever mentioned it, but
proof of God existence by humor.
Yeah, I think Plantinga talks of it as one of the properly basic beliefs, isn't it? Yes, I think it's a really good one, isn't it? Because there's only, I was given a prophecy when I started comedy from Genesis 21, verse 6, which is where, I think verse 6 or verse 10, where Sarah says, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And it's the laughter of joy when she's having the little baby. So I think God has got a sense of humor, but then it depends what we mean by that, because people want to project onto humor and comedy lots of different connotations. So some people would say, oh, I don't like comedy because it's rude. No, comedy is neutral. Comedy is neutral. Comedians are rude. Guns don't kill people, rappers do, or whatever the phrase was back in with Blazing Squad.
Wappers do. Yeah.
Wappers do. So comedy is neutral. And I think when I became a Christian at the age of 22, I was experiencing a joy that made me laugh a lot. I was laughing a lot with joy. And that was around the same time I went in to comedy. And so for me, there was no disconnect between going into comedy and being a Christian, because first I've been called into it, I felt sent into it, and becoming a Christian filled me with such joy that I was laughing a lot and smiling a lot, and people definitely saw the change in me. So does God have a sense of humor? Yes. does that mean that he likes a bit of blue for the dads? No, I don't think it means that. Does God ever punch down? No, he doesn't punch up either, because there is nobody above him. But I think that when comedy is used to speak truth to power, another myth is when people say to me, "Oh, comedians are the modern day prophets." No, we're not. Comedians are yes men and snake oil salesmen. We're not. we are not really prophets. But But it is potential. There is potential. Comedy could really be prophetic in terms of. And I suppose there are people like who am I thinking of? Mark Steele and people like that, Mark Nelson, who speak truth to power. The kind of social activism comedians. So that's prophetic in a sense. But generally, I just think that God is lots of things, and we don't want to become too limited. It's like when people say, "What happens at the cross?" Oh, at the cross, God takes the punishment for the sins that you deserve. Well, yeah, that's true, but other things are happening at the cross as well. Mm-hmm. Even in Hebrews, in I think one of the first chapters of Hebrews, it talks about two separate things that are going on as Jesus dies. So to limit God to he has a sense of humor or he doesn't have a sense of humor, he's naughty or he's nice, he's angry or he's not angry. Well, God is love, but because he's love, he's also angry. He is angry because he hates things happening to his kids. He hates injustice. He doesn't just love everything. He doesn't love evil. He's not an idiot. So again, it's all about this nuance, isn't it? I wouldn't want to overload the idea that God has a sense of humor, but of course he has, because he invented laughter. And when you laugh, all the tension is being expelled from your body. Laughter is like a leaf blower for the soul. So laughter is literally the release of tension from your body. And when you leave a comedy club that you've enjoyed, or a comedy night you've enjoyed, you feel the endorphins being released have made you feel better than when you entered the club. What an amazing spiritual gift. That hasn't happened by mistake. But it's what you do. It's the way you get to the laughter, isn't it? And there's the joyful, gleeful laugh of a child is different to the maniacal laughter of a mad scientist. So laughter is neutral. People are not.
One thing that just came to my mind is I was in my kitchen. Well, actually, I'm technically still in my kitchen, but completely unrelated what you were just talking about. But it reminded me about your book that I read. What was the one about Tom
Hillingthwaite? Yeah,
Tom Hillingthwaite. Have you read that, Phil?
I've since accidentally become. So basically, it's a book about a guy who becomes an evangelist and is terrible at it. And I didn't mean to become Tom Hillingthwaite, but I'm now actually pretty much following chapter by chapter his demise.
It was good. It did make me laugh. It's not the sort of stuff I'd usually buy, but it was very fun. I actually left out during lockdown. We would put a box of books out every day for people to take. And I tried like half secular, half Christian, trying to get rid of some of the. I did actually put yours in there, and I think it did get taken. So
that's good. The problem with Tom Hillingthwaite is that the cover made it look like it was a children's book.
Yes, yeah.
Which is why sales weren't anywhere near as much as they should have been. But no, I'm very happy. I was very proud of it, and worked really hard on it. But yeah, you live and learn, don't you?
Yeah, I think it was Andy Bannister shared what his cover could have looked like recently, one of the two options, and I was looking at it going, goodness, how the option that didn't get printed that definitely wouldn't have sold half as well. I think there's a sort of 80s 90s look to the cover. You could tell it's a Christian book instantly. Don't say that very very complimentary in that way. So some books you're just like, I don't. Yeah, there's for some reason, and you can part of our conversation about comedy and church comedy. There is sort of a history of distrust when it comes to even art. Like, is this guy going to be good at his musicianship? Is this guy going to be good at his comedy? Is this guy going to be a good evangelist? Christians are really judgmental.
Yeah, no, we really are.
We really are. I can't trust it. I've been burnt by this. I've brought my friend to, and yeah, this must be really hard when you are the artist in question to go through that.
Yeah, and like it doesn't often come across as outright animosity, but like you do sometimes look at some Christians in the audience, and you can tell they're like, you dare ruin this for us.
Yeah.
Don't be rubbish. don't you dare be rubbish.
How dare you? I prayed about this.
Yeah.
Prayed. I brought my friend. They came, and now I'm really nervous that you're going to be rubbish.
Yeah.
So who are some sort of influences of you, whether Christian or not, in terms of like influencing? I mean, you've mentioned some people already in terms of the Christian, like the comedy side, preaching side. Like who are sort of your biggest sort of influences, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think lots of things and lots of people, because like the group that you guys are admins of on Facebook, that's been a massive blessing for me over the however many years it's been going now. Because so you guys in one respect, there's been that constant influence and outlet for me to go and read stuff, and I probably don't read the comments even on that group anymore. But it's been amazing and has been able to connect me with people. So I like, let me list some people then. My favorite comedian of all time is Frank Skinner. My childhood hero, comedy hero is Frank Skinner. My current favorite comedian is Paul Foote, who is a very surrealist, almost anti-comedian. So I take aspects of that. I love Glenn Scrivener's creative evangelism. I don't think anyone uses creative evangelism better than him. I love Andy Bannister's humorous apologetics, and I think at the moment he is the funniest apologist that we have. And when I read The Atheist Who Didn't Exist, I just thought I loved it as a book, but I also thought this is the book that I wish I'd been able to write. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I know Andy very well, and his jokes are in real life are bad. He is frustrating to be around. But the book itself, to make,
just so you know, I'm going to cut that bit out too and say Andy kind slags off.
Yeah, slags off that. I'll tell you who else is an idiot. Nicky Gumbel. Come on.
NT Wright. No time for him.
Yeah.
And his scholarship.
Yeah.
He's some sort of scholar.
So, NT Wright, I love in terms of his gentleness and his nuance.
Yeah.
And whenever I'm feeling upset about an issue or confused about an issue, I just watch it. I'll YouTube NT Wright, basically. Todd White for his confidence and his passion. Tim Keller for his rigorous logic and argumentation. Bill Craig, because he's a cyborg. And like just I think, my biggest, I don't know if I'd still be a Christian if I hadn't come across William Lane Craig at the time that I did. I probably would be, but I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. So again, you draw on lots of people. Those would be my biggest influences. And I think probably I look, and then some musicians maybe. So there was a folk broken up now, but Bellow had a folk group, and I really liked them because they were doing stuff that was different. I like people who pioneer stuff, even if I'm not a fan of what it is they're pioneering. I like to see what's when people are pioneering things. What is happening? What is it that they're fusing together, and how are they fusing it? So bantering and ad-libbing on stage is simply bringing two disparate ideas together into one whole, and that's what I'm trying to do on a more thematic, large scale. I'm trying to bring preaching and comedy together. I'm trying to form disparate things into one unified whole, and so I like people who do that in the arts. So I don't have, that's quite a full answer really, but I I love seeing people be brilliant at what they do. This isn't the final one. This is an interesting one. When it comes to preaching, Mark Rylance, who's not a preacher, he's an actor. But when I'm practicing preaching, when I'm working on my preaching, I will often watch a Mark Rylance Shakespeare speech. This is a preaching hack, actually, because this is like the secret family recipe for me. I will watch him giving a speech, and I will watch how he's doing it, and then I will bring that demeanor into preaching. So at the end of Hidden in Plain Sight, I go from the "Hey guys, comedy," and I go into the Shakespearean actor. And if you're watching carefully, you can sort of see it happen. But right at the end, when I'm giving the final gospel punch, I am doing it as though I'm on stage at the Globe, just because I think there's a power and there's a timing and an understated nuance about it. So yeah, Mark Rylance.
I've actually shared a beer. Well, not shared the same beer.
That's awkward.
Had a beer with Frank Skinner.
Wow.
Yeah. I was a contestant on a show on Sky Atlantic called Don't Sit in the Front Row. Yeah, it only ran for one season. I actually did the pilot, and then they asked me back for another show. You get paired with a comedian, and the comedian has to use your funny stories from your life to make people laugh. And I've got stuff like, I was kind of like Harry Potter because I lived in an actual cupboard for a while. Wow. And I almost I strangled an old man by accident.
I'm glad you added the by accident.
Yeah, well, I was walking behind. There's an alley behind my house, and my brother always walked our dog, and he wore a flat cap as if he was sort of a Lincolnshire farmer. And so I thought, what would be funny, because I saw him in front of me, and I thought, I know, I'll pretend to mug him. And so I snuck up behind him and strangled him. And then when I looked at his face, I realized that it wasn't actually my brother. It was an old man. No. And he wasn't that chuffed, and tried to sort of hit me. And I was incredibly apologetic. Like, I'm so sorry. I thought you were my brother. Yeah, that realization. I've had a few of those experiences, when like you're expecting one thing, and then the opposite happens, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
Like, it was one of those moments. I was like, you're not my brother.
Yeah.
It was, yeah. There's quite a few, but that was good. And so Frank Skinner was on I think it was Jack D as well. Jack D was presenting it, and Frank Skinner was there for one of them. And yeah, I've got a picture somewhere of me and my wife with having a beer with him. And a Chinese, I think. Do we have a Chinese?
Nice.
I remember. Maybe it was.
That's brilliant.
Like that.
But I think, just going back to what we were saying, I think that you want, because preaching is an art as well as a science, you want it to be as rich as possible. And I want my stage presence to be as rich as possible, because it does help. You know what? If the atheists can put on shows, if Tim Minchin can go all the smells and bells, then so can I. It's not cheating to be really good and really polished at what you do. So, and again, I watched a lot of the SAS Are You Tough Enough stuff, and I've read a couple of books about those guys, and they're constantly training and constantly bringing in different disciplines to enhance the whole, to become that kind of perfect soldier. And so I just want what people see to be as rich as possible, not to be a one-trick, one-note pony, but to have that ability to instruct, to improve, to rivet and delight, and to stir and move to action. And the way you do that is by learning from people who are amazing at what they do in different fields, and drawing from it. So yeah, when I'm I rehearse, I memorize Shakespearean speeches and deliver them to the mirror on my own. Don't record them, but I memorize them and deliver them just to help with preaching.
Wow.
How long does that tend to take? Well, I mean, we've got one question here that's kind of linked to someone saying that they preach far more naturally without notes, but awful at remembering what I want to say.
Yeah.
How do you go about practically doing no notes preaching? Is it literally just the time? You just need to set aside time to memorize each week, or
yeah, I mean, if I'm, and it's different, isn't it? If you're preaching at your own church, you are using notes of some sort, unless you've done it, unless it's a talk that you've done several times before, and you're just cheating by bringing it home. You are using notes, and I think it's different, isn't it? Recording to a screen. I've done so many preachers during lockdown, and I absolutely hate it. I flipping hate it.
I just did before talking to you. I did my one for Sunday, and I'm so bored of it already.
Because there's no affirmation, there's no adrenaline, there's no instant gratification, there's no body language. So you can't. My skill set has been demolished because I can't read. There's no one to read. Like, how's this going? Which is why I have this guy. I use this guy, Alan, my stuffed fox. He's my stooge. So he's in all of my preaches.
Wow.
And in last week's preach, he was speaking French. So I cut to him speaking French. And we had a conversation with him speaking French and me it was me speaking French, obviously, but he was on the screen. So try to include these little vignettes. But how do you go about it? Learning it. Yeah, you just learn it. And I think it's easier to remember a story than a series of facts, isn't it? So
true.
If everything can be embedded in story. But yeah, I just go over it. And because my mind is wired in that way, I have trained my mind to be able to quickly remember series of things. It is easier for me, but I would still use notes. I've got notes here for tonight. I've got some notes there. And I think when you're doing it to camera, I try to have bullet points and then just quickly look down at the bullet point, so I know what I'm going to say. You learn the paragraph, or you learn the theme. But when you're live, it's a bit different live, because even if you take a break and you take a sip of water and you're looking at your notes, people can still see you, and they're still experiencing it live, and they can chat to their friend. Whereas over camera, you can't really have any dead air time.
No,
you've really just got to keep talking, because otherwise it looks like a hostage video.
It's so true. Yeah, there was a tweet fairly early on in lockdown that I saw of please keep all your preachers in mind as they prepare to try and make sure their preachers don't look like a Osama bin Laden video.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So true. That's really helpful. I just find it's the timing aspect, and I'm sort of an assistant pastor at my church, and so I preach occasionally, but just find I'm not giving myself enough time to get to those points where I'm like, yeah, actually I really memorize it. And and it does kind of work that with notes you can kind of keep it under the camera, and you can find ways to do that. I haven't yet got as creative as you have with your bilingual thing. Whatever that is.
I think it's just
Fox. Sorry.
He's an agnostic. His character has grown over lockdown.
I love that.
More complex life.
That's amazing. That's it.
But I think that what you've just got to, when you're preaching, you've got to own it, haven't you? So that doesn't mean you have to memorize it, but it means that when you are looking at your notes, you know that they are your words that you're going to say.
Yeah.
So, I've never had to do it, but I'm sure it might happen at some point. But you can tell when someone's just copied out a John Piper sermon.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell when something's not authentic. That's why I try and cry as much as possible during preaching. It gives me a bit of time to think. It also makes people think, wow, he's really speaking from the heart.
Man, so you are a weeper, are you?
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That would make me.
Dan can't handle that.
I couldn't. That would be that's like a deal breaker for going to a church. If the preacher cries too frequently, I can't.
all the time, mate.
Oh, can't do it.
Yeah.
You're probably right up there, and it's
Yeah.
just the crying,
crashing down.
And the thing is, I know it's a problem with me. I know the crier is not the problem, unless it's like, unnecessary crying.
Yeah.
But I know it's my own insecurities and that I can't deal with sort of emotion.
Well, you said earlier on that you're naturally conservative, and conservatives hate any kind of emotion, don't they? Like pull yourself
it's icky.
Together.
It's icky. Pull your bootstraps up.
Just want the information. Just give me the information.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
I don't cry all the time. Really, I haven't cried.
Okay.
Haven't cried during.
You haven't cried in this. That would be bad.
But the reason is though, maybe Phil, you're the same. You're the first person to get converted by your talks. I think, like when you start talking about the gospel and you see people respect for the first time, like, oh, it's that's what it is. I get it now.
Right.
How can you not get emotional about that? Yeah. It's just, there isn't anything like preaching the gospel and seeing people get it in front of your eyes. That's what gets me crying.
Yeah.
Rain Man.
Yeah.
I think, what was it? You've cried once in your life, and that was when.
No. I have. There are legit. I have rules. There are legitimate reasons for crying. One is death or severe pain. Others are
$1 Million Baby.
No, I'll get into it. Wait. Death and suffering. The second is like big moments, the birth of a child. I became very emotional. I cried loads when my first daughter was born, and then that stopped, thankfully, after about a couple of weeks.
Mine hasn't stopped, so
you're still going.
Yeah, but that's another story. And
third is documentaries or movies that are based on real events.
Yeah.
Although the one that did get me, the exception to that is $1 Million Baby, because I know that's not real, but it got me at a low point and I wasn't expecting it. And I was emotionally, I'd been alone for a while, and I was a bit low, and it got me and I cried. Yeah. But no, I don't usually let them. Schindler's List.
I was the same with Planes, Trains and Automobiles. It honestly just smashed me at the end.
I've not seen that.
Oh, it's amazing.
I'm gonna have to.
But now you've told me it made you cry, I'm not going to watch it.
No, thanks.
I feel like we're having a vulnerable moment, guys. Wary of moving on.
So it just got me thinking now. So the only time I did cry reading a book was Bonhoeffer biography by Eric Metaxas, and I was reading it on the train on the way back when I was commuting into London, and I just started like weeping. And I was like, oh my God, I have to stop reading it. Like all these like businessmen, like, what's he doing?
I don't know who you are, Dan. I thought I knew so well.
Because I knew what happened. It's horrible. He's had these letters to his fiance, and you know that he, I'm going to ruin it for you, but he dies, and they never see each other.
Spoiler.
I couldn't contain it, and so I had to read it at home. So I just like weeping at home. And we had Ben Thornton, Phil, who was staying at our house for our friend from church, and I'm just like, he might just like come into the room. I'm like weeping, because I'm like, it's never happened since, but it was. I don't like those moments. It's like a defeat.
Yeah.
Is that because you sent Mel some love letters and she didn't get them either? Is there something?
Nothing. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, it's deeply tied to that real life experience.
Yeah.
We've got a request for starting a fundraiser for Daniel. I mean, anyone who doesn't weep at the first 10 minutes of Up needs help.
I say I didn't like it.
You didn't like it?
I didn't like it.
The first 10 minutes of the whole film.
The whole film, I was ambivalent.
That's controversial.
But I was massively ambivalent, and I am a weeper. I love a bit of Disney. The Disney Aladdin remake is off the charts good, man. But Up just didn't do anything for me at all.
Not even those first 10 minutes.
No.
Really?
I just thought I remember feeling annoyed. I remember feeling it was hokey. It was like, okay, it's like it was essentially a weepy version of the beach scene from Saving Private Ryan. It's like we're going in very high end here. instant death. And like with Saving Private Ryan, you think, okay, because there's a context of D-Day. But with Up, it's just totally I found it self-indulgent.
Oh, that's brilliant.
You're like just a slightly you're like an eccentric Bishop Barron doing film reviews. Have you ever watched his film reviews?
That's a new channel, Film Reviews with Andy Kine.
That's what you should do during lockdown. Start become the new Bishop Barron.
And again, I cried at loads of films, and I think I even probably cried at the end of Moana on one occasion. But
don't talk, because it's really difficult for me to hold you in like higher step. Yeah. But then the more you're talking now, it's just getting lower and lower.
This is what happens at the 2-hour mark of a conversation.
Would it help if I like went through the whole Crystal Palace side from like 1992 or something like that?
No, Phil won't appreciate. He doesn't even know who Crystal Palace are.
No, he's somewhere up north, isn't it? Got some good comments here at the moment. So Dan, you're strangling an old man story has proved a hit, and Chris' response to your response on Up. So much for Mr. Nuance is the response.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
We've got some other questions coming actually that I don't know. After the conversation so far, it's a bit serious. Maybe we can do a summary question. So we've got you kind of talked about people that influenced you, and it was a really broad spectrum. And so I'd recommend anyone going into apologetics or evangelism to have that kind of spread. I think that's so important. If you go into just apologetics for apologetics' sake, you end up losing the nuance that's needed. But if you are to list 5 apologists that have influenced you most, what would those 5 apologists be?
Great, easy. So, well, not easy, but I can do it. So you've got to say C.S. Lewis, just because I just don't think there's anyone on either side of the sacred secular divide who has his imagination and creativity. And he was arguably a bit misogynistic, but he was also of his time. Like you can't just blame everybody for not being on the right side of history all the time. I'm just sick of it. Like in 200 years' time, none of us will be on the right side of history. Like goodness knows what people 200 years from now will be thinking about us. So C.S. Lewis, just again, for the range of stuff that he does. I mean, I'm reading the sci-fi trilogy at the moment, but I've read The Great Divorce and reading Narnia to my kids, and just a genius. So he would have to be number one. It's a bit of a boring one because everyone does that, but I'd say him. I'd have to say William Lane Craig, just because of I think how he dragged Christian apologetics center stage, really, in the modern age, and just basically has taken on all comers. And I've never seen him bested. I've seen him thwarted by smoke screens, but I've never seen him bested. So him, I will say Rebecca McLaughlin, who I've just finished Confronting Christianity.
Great
and
book.
It's a great book, and I've listened to the audio, and I really, really liked it. I'll have to say Andy Bannister because he's my friend, but also he's so unlikely because he's just such a lovely man, and you don't get the impression that all of these kind of academic apologists are like that easy to be around. But whereas you wouldn't know that Andy Bannister had basically destroyed the Quran with his PhD. You would, by showing that it's based on oral tradition. You wouldn't know that he was a PhD at all, or because he's just so humble. So I'll say Bannister, and then it's interesting because I'm watching a lot of Ravi at the moment because of him just having gone to be with the Lord. But I haven't watched huge amounts of Ravi over the years, really. So I probably can't say him. So whoever I've done so far, I've done Bannister, C.S. Lewis, William Lane Craig, Lewis. Rebecca McLaughlin, and who else would I say? I did. It was on the tip. Oh, Michael Ramsden. I love Michael Ramsden.
That's a great shout. Yeah.
I just think he's an absolute beast and a legend.
Yeah.
I want to be friends with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to be friends with Michael Ramsden. He's one of those people who's got crazy intellect, great sense of humor, amazing communicator, and he's just such a good evangelist.
I think he's probably, if I could watch any of the, well, obviously watch C.S. Lewis, but apart from C.S. Lewis, if I could watch any evangelist or apologist live, I'd probably say Ramsden. And special mention to Christy Mayer, who's a friend of mine as well, and just, again, really humble, way cleverer than she thinks she is, and just really pioneering some great stuff. So Christy Mayer would be honourable mention.
We want to get her on here. Can you put in a good word? I don't know how to get hold of her. I know I've heard she's busy.
She is busy. I can hook you up.
That'd be cool. Yeah, I've heard good things. I'd like to. I think there's a few mutual friends through sort of UCCF channels that I've got, but we'll see if we can get her on at some point. There's one that's probably going from high comedy to a little bit more of a serious topic, and I'll be interested in your opinion on this. And the question on the page, and maybe we'll make this the last question at this point. Obviously, being an evangelist, you have to share the gospel. There's two aspects to the gospel: the good news and the bad news. What's your take on the bad news or the hell question? The question specifically is, what do you make of a specific view of hell, which is conditional immortality, from the chat?
Well,
how do you present that aspect of the gospel, and where do you sit in the sort of three main views of hell?
That's a brilliant question, whoever's asked that, and so thank you. So yeah, it's interesting. My approach to preaching is very much that you can't understand the good news until you understand the bad news. But I don't simply mean if you don't become a Christian, then you'll go to hell. What I try to do, if I've got free reign in the gospel presentation, I will try and tear down worldviews like dominoes, so that at the end people are left at the foot of the cross and they don't know how they got there. So my aim is to gently arrow people towards the foot of the cross. So I would simply talk about, and again, you try to do it in quite a modest and humble way. You talk about how, if atheism is true, then, if atheism, then obliteration, annihilation, the universe doesn't love you. You are simply a protoplasmic sack of chemicals. The good news of atheism is that whether you die at 92 years age after a joy-filled life of humanitarian aid work, or you die screaming in pain at 9 minutes, your reward is exactly the same: obliteration, annihilation, because the universe doesn't love you. The universe isn't sure why it created itself, let alone why you're here. That's the good news of atheism. And I would say that verbatim. I mean, I'm basically saying verbatim now, but so I would, because what I want to do is I want to do what we said earlier, back on Old Earth when we started this conversation, is to address not what I think is important, but what they think is important. And so you've got secular people who might not be atheists, because very few people are actually atheists, but they are secular and they think Christianity is ridiculous. So what I want to do is to show that even if you think Christianity is superficially ridiculous, if you look at any worldview, you'll find at some point that it's even more ridiculous, that actually everything is ridiculous. And Michael Ramsden says it's difficult to make any worldview totally cohere. We just believe that Christianity coheres the best. So I would try and what I want to do is to start with a level playing field and say, if everything is ridiculous, which it is, we're still left with the reality that something is true. And that might be atheism. What if it's atheism? Then it's bad news. If atheism is true, then it is bad news. If the other religions are true, and this is my main thing, this is my main sort of not bugbear, but the thing I go to town on the most is competing religious views, because I think the zeitgeist view at the moment is of a general spirituality. which is really Oriental Gnosticism disguised as self-empowerment or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I look at what these religions say in their own words and on their own terms, and address questions like, oh, every religion talks about a God of love. No, they don't. They just really don't.
No.
Every religion, there's many ways to God. Well, no, because almost no one else is offering you a way to God. Mm-hmm. See, Dan's crying, he can't bear it. He's like, he's so emotional.
You can hear him weep.
Yeah. So I am getting to the answer to the question. But
no, it's good.
The whole approach is that I fell in love with the gospel when I realized that there was no other story like it. That no one else was offering me the life of abundance and freedom that Jesus offers. Once I realized that when Jesus says, no one comes to the Father but through me, that's not arrogant because no one else is offering to take you to the Father. Or when Christians say there is no other name by which man can be saved, that's not us being arrogant because no one else is offering to save you. It's stuff like that.
That's think, oh, that's really good. I love that.
Yeah. You think, gosh, this is why it's good news. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, good news in comparison to the other news being bad. Even if the other news is true, it's bad news. At the best, it's good advice, but it's also bad news. So then with the hell question. So if someone says to me, what's the area of theology that you think you're wrong about? I think it's hell. Because I make my decision on, it's the only area of my theology where it's based on my emotional ability to cope. So I'm an annihilationist. Because I find that the most conducive to evangelism and apologetics, because again it ties into that question of C.S. Lewis, doesn't it? Either there's two types of people, those who say to God, your will be done, or those to whom God says, your will be done. And I like the idea that that really people who don't want to be with Jesus get what they're expecting, which is nothing. Mm-hmm. But generally I'm an annihilationist because I can cope with that. I'm a Pentecostalist on the streets and a Calvinist in the sheets, which means that when I'm out sharing the gospel, I'm sharing it like there's no tomorrow, and like everyone needs to hear the gospel. But at some point you need to relax, don't you, and rest on God's sovereignty. So again, you have to have nuance and you have to have balance.
Yeah.
I think there is nuance. So I used to be a universalist, but I also used to never lead anyone to Christ. And the period where I never led anyone to Christ and the period where I was a universalist they're not a Venn diagram, they're a circle. It's one circle on top of another.
Yeah.
So practically, I'm not even a hopeful universalist because actually I think people need to be able to decide to reject Jesus.
That's where I'm at. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to kind of ping it back to you, I'm in the same boat. Like I don't want you to sweat. But it's interesting that you talk about it being an ability to cope and how it relates to evangelism. And there's often fired back at annihilationists, and I've had this in my experience in discussions online, is how does it impact your evangelism if they get what they want? And it's well, that's exactly it. Our God is both just, they will get the eternal punishment of not being in eternal life, but he's not going to torment them forever. and that language of torment forever that only comes in 2 verses in the entirety of the Bible needs to be dug into, because it's the most symbolic book of the Bible. I've heard it said, if you didn't have Revelation, everyone would be annihilationists. And then you've got to dig into Revelation, why 2 verses then cause this tradition to emerge. So I completely agree. And when I dug into it, I found my evangelism has actually had more focus, I'm more confident in the gospel because I can use language of life or death.
Yeah.
And leave it at that, because the Bible does, like, constantly just going through Acts. You're like, they don't preach this eternal torment thing.
Yeah.
I can preach the gospel as they do.
But they do. But I would also say that if it turns out that eternal conscious torment is true, that will be fair. If it's true, then it is fair. And so, and again, I want to, give room for that
nuance.
And have the nuance, and also understand that is the area of theology where I'm making a decision because I want that to be true.
That's interesting.
I want annihilationism to be true.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
But I do also think it makes the most sense missiologically. So, I have got people in my church who basically would rebuke me for not being conservative enough on the issue of hell. But I'm an evangelist. What I'm trying to do is to show that choices have consequences. And so that would be my approach to preaching about hell. That choices have consequences. And you can choose to reject Jesus. But, the three nouns to describe God in the New Testament are love, light, and life. And if you turn your back on love, light, and life, you get death, destruction, and disconnection. Well, that sounds a lot like hell to me. Jesus Christ isn't the allocator of joy and freedom and peace. He's the source of these things. There isn't a place, heaven isn't Center Parks. Heaven isn't a reward for a life well lived. There isn't a place that Jesus can send you to be happy where he isn't. So evangelistically, I find that very helpful. Like, yes, if you don't want to be with Jesus for eternity, then you don't have to. But what are you expecting to happen?
Yep.
I think hell and heaven are two overloaded terms. But actually, it is a binary choice, presence of God or absence of God.
Yep.
Whatever presence and absence look like, those are the two choices, presence of God or absence of God. And how eternal and temporarily, in a temporal sense, that absence is, I don't know. But for me, what I say to people is, even if you're a universalist and you believe that because of the cross, everybody will ultimately end up in heaven, your family and friends will be finding you around the throne and saying, why didn't you tell me about Jesus? I knew you for 40 years and you didn't tell me about this guy who could have freed me from my addiction or helped me with my anxiety or brought me comfort in my affliction. So I don't really care what a Christian's view on hell is. Well, I do care whether they tell people about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Tell people about Jesus, because there's no other show in town. There's no other show in town.
Amen. Dan, you were going to say something.
No, it's interesting because obviously I wasn't expecting you to say that.
Oh, right.
So I think what's interesting is because I hold to the same view, but on exegetical grounds, not
emotional.
Not for those reasons, but I appreciate why you would come to that conclusion because of that. I know for me it just makes better sense of scripture. Even basic things. I know when I talked to Phil about, even something like John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever should perish, it's perish or have eternal life. So there is this dichotomy, is eternal life and then there's perish. So perish can't mean eternal life, because there's either one or the other. So it's either perish, and then you look at the language throughout the New Testament of destruction, death, and that they're not synonyms for eternal life. And I don't want to end up getting into this, but I know me and Phil talk about this issue quite a lot. So it's interesting. So maybe if people listening or later on want to look at that question in more detail, is getting Edward Fudge's book, The Fire That Consumes.
Well, I've done a decent amount of study on it. So if they want to go to the hellproject.online or search the Hell Project on YouTube, you'll find a channel that's where I've done all my work and just put it onto the internet. So I agree. Mine was an accidental stumbling over annihilationism because of Dan. So he dropped John 3:16. Well, I first called him a heretic because he had this book called Rethinking Hell in his bookcase, and he told me to read it and tell him what perish meant. And so I dug into it for a good little while, and this is where I'm at. And so I find, from that point on, I've got a more thorough foundation and conviction for God will ultimately remove all evil, suffering, and sin and death completely, and new creation hope is amazing. It's the complete opposite of all those things, and it's actually reconnected my idea of what we mean by heaven, what our ultimate hope is, where we're going to, isn't off there somewhere, but it's new heaven, new earth. And for me, that is such an amazing answer to the idea of God and suffering. We know that Christ has done something at the cross. That's a great answer to suffering. But we also know this amazing verse that says one day there'll be no more pain, no more mourning, no more death. I mean, if that's not good news. So we have both the cross and the hope, and this is a good story and good news. And for me, there's no space for this realm of ongoing torment. It makes I can't find an answer to why that would exist in new creation, why God would allow it to exist. I've heard theories of like God allows people to continue sinning, and I'm like, I'm looking at the Bible. There's no more death, and the sting of death is sin. Like death and sin are hand in hand. If there's no more death, there's no more sin. We've got new creation. Like this is good news. Why are we telling people that it's still around in the new creation? So I'm a bit passionate about it.
And I think the only thing we have to be, so the only reason I'm a bit not sensitive, but trying to be sensitive in the way I talk about it is because I'm aware that actually there are lots of people who are our brothers and sisters who really do hold fiercely but earnestly to the eternal conscious torment thing.
Amen.
And would want to show in the Bible where they think that line of best fit runs. And so I want to honor and respect that, and also say, there's a degree to which it's an in-house issue, really.
Exactly. That's really important.
But, in terms of mission and evangelism, I want people to know that they do have to make a choice, and that is an urgent choice. And actually, there is no worldview. There is no worldview where living a good life as you think a good life should be lived gets you to heaven. That doesn't exist. So I want to demolish arguments and show people where the bad news is and where the bad arguments are, and point people to Jesus, because I just don't think there's anything else worth being pointed to. Like, he is the Lord. But equally, I just think I want to be sensitive to the fact that lots of people who know God as well as me and read their Bible more than me and are cleverer than me do have a more conservative view. And I don't, again, I'm not interested in tribalism. I'm interested in community and us being on mission together, on the essentials unity, on the non-essentials charity, I think.
That's great. And it's always a good reminder. It's partly why I've done this channel, to get away from just digging into one topic. I didn't want to be a one topic wonder, and I'm not sure I'm a wonder at that. So it's something that I'm passionate about, because I really like how N.T. Wright talks about it, and it's getting people to relearn what we mean by heaven. And if that's more how I can be clear about things, like the hell topic can fall by the wayside, basically, because I want people to know about heaven. And when they ask about the other side, I have this back catalogue of exegetical reasons for why I handle it the way I do. But I think so many Christians don't have that new creation hope. They have that idea of, which is actually a fairly Muslim idea. I was talking to a Muslim today, of the world ends and I go up to heaven, or I go down to hell, and there's these levels and I'll be judged on some aspect. And maybe their theology has removed the levels aspect. They haven't gone full Dante's Inferno, but they've come close to it. And it's reconnecting with those a bit where we're headed.
It's kind of Islamic Platonism, isn't it? Really, it's a kind of a merge of those two things, really. And again, that's where on hell, I only really want to listen to N.T. Wright. I just want to listen to him. I also want him to be my dad.
Yeah. Oh, the Ask N.T. Wright podcast is my favourite.
My dad's great, but you know what I mean. You look at him, you think, I wish you could read me a bedtime story.
We'll suggest that to Justin Brierley when we have Justin Brierley on. Like, can you do a third podcast?
Ask Write anything. Can Andy Kine come and sit on your lap?
I wasn't going to go that way. But we want this. We've got a little button that we have to press. This is made for kids. I don't think I'm allowed to put that on there.
I'd love to see N.T. Wright doing CBeebies bedtime story. It's just a chapter from the resurrection of the Son of God. 6 hours later.
Amazing. Oh, but people would still be listening.
Sorry.
Fantastic. So we're at 2 hours 25 minutes, and
come on,
we're doing well. But I think as it's I've got to go to bed soon. There's actually no more questions at the moment. We've covered all of them. The only thing that was offered right at the beginning by London Theist was, let's set up a comedian apologetics debate, Andy versus Ricky Gervais.
We've tried. No, we've tried.
Have you?
We have tried.
Really?
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, I don't want to be kind of flip the whole Matt Dillahunty, William Lane Craig won't debate me thing. But
you should have an empty chair.
Me and Justin have tried on several occasions to get me debating another comedian.
Oh, really?
And none of them have said yes yet. But I mean, I'd be up for it.
That'd be great. I'd love to put it out you and Gervais. It'd be great.
Get some retweets. Once we've got a bit more of a following. Because I'm a massive fan of his.
Like, again, disagreement is not dislike. He's amazing.
Yeah, he's a funny guy. He's not my top, but I appreciate what he does.
Yeah. But I'd love it.
Cool.
One day.
Yeah, we'll get there. London Theist can start retweeting stuff to get Ricky Gervais on.
Start tweeting all the theists in London, and
there you go. get it all. On that note, so we have a fairly standard question, and it's Dan's job to ask it. So go on, Dan. How do we finish?
No, I was just going to say, obviously we'll have to be relatively a couple of books you might recommend people read, and maybe just a couple of people who people listening might not know about, but they should. Yeah, great.
Well, so I would definitely, again, I'd want to, maybe because it's fresh, but maybe because I think, she's good on the scene. So Rebecca McLaughlin, I think is really interesting voice. And so I would recommend Confronting Christianity. And I would recommend The War of Loves by David Bennett, which is not strictly apologetics, but it does have apologetical elements. And what's interesting about both of those guys, Rebecca and David, is that they are both same-sex attracted and have both had to go on that really difficult journey of understanding what it means to love Jesus more than they love their own desires. And so I just think that I've got another friend who is a vicar, but also same-sex attracted, but celibate. And I asked him why have you taken this choice? Because actually within the Anglican Church, you could quite easily be practicing and no one would mind. And he said, I don't think that sacrifice is ever wasted when it's done for Jesus. I don't think sacrifice, and I really just appreciated that. So yeah, the two books I'd recommend: Confronting Christianity by Rebecca McLaughlin, and War of Loves by David Bennett. And both of those guys are worth following and pursuing. And also, I would say, me, because I'm kind of a big deal, and everyone should follow me. But no, you can follow me at Andy Kine Comedy on YouTube and Facebook, and it's a mixture of preaching and comedy, and it's a weird mix. But come along for the ride.
Are you on Parler yet?
Yes, I have.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't it parlay?
Well, yeah, probably, but I'm putting the American emphasis on it.
It's not Ray Parler, is it?
Parlay. Well, I doubt it. I don't know. Maybe I'm being a bit stereotypical, but do the Americans call it that?
I don't know what they call it. I have joined it, but
it seemed
it seemed like a sort of far right far right Americans.
Yeah, it was
where's the nuance, everyone?
There's none there.
Definitely missing the nuance for something called parlay. But and the recommendations on the right, when something recommends you Katie Hopkins, I'm not a big fan of that.
Yeah.
It also feels like Facebook in 2006.
Okay.
It doesn't have much going for it. I'll be that honest, but we're on there. So if anyone has joined parlay, like every other right wing apparently person, that's what the media says. At least that's why I use that phrase. We aren't right wing. But we're on there. Give us a shout. There's a few other apologists and evangelists on there at the moment. But if that's the new platform, we'll try it out. Cool, Andy. It's been a privilege, and we've really enjoyed it. And we'll be sure to have you again on here at some point in the near future, I'm sure.
I've loved it. Thank you so much, guys. Have we broken the record for longest one?
I'm afraid that we are. Neil Shenvy, sorry, has 28 minutes on us, I'm afraid. And but he had the bonus of being at a weekend, so I don't have that stamina for another 30 minutes. I would love to. Maybe we'll just have
apology rejected.
I'm so sorry. I feel shame, but I believe Jesus will take that away.
You'll be number two. You're number two. You can take that. You can sleep well. You beat Glenn Scrivener, yeah.
Yeah. So I always beat Glenn. He knows who the winner is.
Nice. Well, on that note, thank you, Andy. Thank you for the people watching. We've had, I think, 6 or 7 viewers throughout the evening. Thank you for sticking with us, and I hope you enjoyed it. Like the episode, share it, subscribe, do all those things. And if you want more content or have anyone we should know about, do send in messages. Otherwise, we'll see you at the next one, which I think the next long form chat we'll have is with Cy Gart, who is a biochemist who was an atheist, now a Christian. Will be talking to us about science atheism. That's on the 23rd of July. I think it's lined up on our channel. Check it out and set a reminder. Otherwise, every Friday I'll be setting up some short snippets of these conversations, and they will trickle through the YouTubes. Cool. Dan, have I missed anything?
No, it sounds good. Yeah, just thank you, Andy. Really nice chatting with you. And we'll have to do it again soon.
Yeah. Bless you.
Cool. God bless.
Thanks, guys.
See you. I'll end the stream. I think that is now.
Are we done?